everyone, this is Mindy Egan and welcome back to the My Favorite Things YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be creating a card using monochromatic colors, meaning I'm only going to use one color for my background and for my flowers. I'm going to be using the Perfect Poppies Dynamics set from My Favorite Things. I have them here on a magnetic sheet, and I'm going to die cut them out of white 80-pound cardstock because I will be ink blending on them later. So I'm just doing the flowers and the petals, and I did die cut out the leaves, but I'm not going to end up using them. To make sure I'm lining up the right pieces with each flower, I actually pulled up the graphic that's on the My Favorite Things website. They have it listed there which pieces go with which flower. So that's what I'm doing right now, is I'm just making sure that I have each one lined up correctly. Once I know which ones go together, I'm going to work on some ink blending. And since these are kind of smaller pieces to ink blend on, I'm going to work on a silicone mat. So it's not sticky, but it does grip my cardstock a little bit so it doesn't slide all over my glass surface. The easiest way for me to apply ink is just using some mini blending tools. These are little mini finger daubers that have kind of a brush end to it, but any small blending tool you have would really work great for this. I started with Stormy Sky Distress Oxide ink. I really wanted to change up the tone. I usually go for like Blueprint Sketch or Salty Ocean, but I kind of wanted a more country tone is how I look at Stormy Sky. So I'm adding that to the center of the big piece, that's the main background piece. I'm adding it to the second layer, and then I'll add it just to the very edge of this petal that's going to overlap. Now, when I'm ink blending these colors on, I want to leave a lot of white space. I don't want it to overtake the flower, which is why one of the other reasons that I'm using these mini ink blending tools. It's a lot easier for me to control the space that I'm blending that color on. I decided I wanted to deepen that color a little bit, so I brought in Chipped Sapphire Distress Oxide ink and applied that right over that Stormy Sky. And I'll go back through all of the areas that I already ink blended, and maybe this also contributed to the look. I end up going with a really dark color, which I will be bringing in Chipped Sapphire Distress ink. Now, Distress inks are a lot more, potent of a color. It's not toned down or doesn't have that chalky look to it. And once I brought in the Chipped Sapphire, I really fell in love with that dark, dark blue. It is quite possible that the oxide or that chalky look helped contribute to the softness of that, going from that really dark color and then softening out to the white. After blending on each petal, I do kind of put it back together to see how it's layering up and to make sure that I'm blending in the right area. I really wanted the color to be for the bigger pieces in the center, and on the smaller pieces, I wanted it on the bottom of each petal. You can see some green off on the side there, and I had done some leaves. You can see at the very top of the screen. I didn't end up liking the color, and I really didn't end up using them. I liked it where it was just the petals. I'm taking the stamens for each flower and I'm die cutting them out of matte gold cardstock, and then I'm adding liquid glue and I'm going to tuck them into the inside of the flower. So once again, I do have the MFT website pulled up while I'm working on this, so I can make sure I'm putting those right where they need to go and where it looks best. Now, this petal I did glue down with the liquid glue, but I decided to add a little bit of dimension to my petals afterwards. So for this smaller one, I am putting on thin foam squares. So there are some foam squares that are a little bit thicker. These are the really thin ones. And I'm going to end up doing that for the rest of my flowers as well. I started working on some scratch paper because I don't like to get excess glue onto my glass work surface, but it ended up just being a lot easier to just move this over to my workspace here and get rid of that scratch paper. Now, this second petal on my second flower here, I did also add some of the thin foam squares too, and same thing with that bottom one, which I did go ahead and already attach that stamen to the inside of it. And I'll do that for my last flower as well. I really like adding the thin foam squares because it's giving a little bit of lift and dimension without overdoing it in case I want to add dimension to the rest of my card. Now, this really dark blue that I used, that Chipped Sapphire Distress ink, was kind of a nice change up because I don't use my distress inks as often as I really should. And the vibrancy of their colors really does a great job when you're adding to the flowers and leaving that hint of white space. So really, this would look great in any color. Once all my flowers are put together, I'm going to work on a background for them. And there are so many different things I could have done for a background, but I ended up grabbing one of my favorite stencils, which is the Watercolor Wash Freeform. So I placed that over some 80-pound white cardstock. I'm holding that down with my magnets from my Make Art station, and then I'm going around the very outer edges of this using that chipped sapphire distress ink and that mini blending tool. I probably could have used a regular sized blending tool at this point, but I wasn't sure really what I was going to do. This was kind of an experiment. So I went around first with just a really, really light layer, kind of blending into the center just a little bit. And then I went back around it again and really deepened up that color. So this is a really striking combination to have that bright white center and the dark blue edges. Off screen, I had arranged the flowers how I wanted them to be on the card front, and I picked them up with a press and seal. I apologize I didn't show that on camera, but I'm able to pick that up all together and then I can place it over the top so I know exactly how this is looking. Then after my background is done, I added foam squares to the back of all of the flowers, and using that press and seal, I'm holding that up and I can kind of position this how I want it to go in the middle of that stencil space. I really wanted the focus to be the flowers, so I'm going to go with a really small sentiment. This is congratulations that I found from the Itty Bitty Baby Sentiments. You could pick any sentiment really to go in there. I just always need congratulations cards right now at this time of the year. So I am stamping this in white pigment ink onto black cardstock that I prepped with an anti-static powder tool. And I couldn't find my little spoon, so I dipped my cardstock into my little bin of white embossing powder and then tapped off any excess. I did have a couple strands there of that embossing powder or speckles, so I just brushed that away with a paintbrush, and then I could come in and melt that with my heat tool. After that's cooled off for a few seconds, I'm going to bring this over to my mini trimmer and line up those edges and just trim this down into a thin strip. I had some extra thin strip cardstock pieces here from that black paper, so I lined it on the back of my sentiment and just trimming off that excess. So this is just another way you can layer up your sentiment if you don't have any foam squares or black foam squares, which is what I typically like to use. But since I already had some of this strips of cardstock cut, I just used that instead. So I added tape runner to the back, and then I'm placing that right in that little cubby hole there by my flowers. I thought about adding some gems to this, but I love the simplicity and that beautiful blue color. That's going to finish up my monochromatic card for you today. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you again soon.